We submit our case covering the issues raised by Count 5. The question whether or not there was any cooperation or collaboration between the three nations, Japan, Germany, and Italy, to dominate the world is not an issue here. Whether they joined together to accomplish war aims must be answered in the negative. It is best answered in the words of General Marshall, quote, "Nor is there evidence of close strategic coordination between Germany and Japan." Mr. Logan will continue.
The tribunal, please. This topic is Japan was provoked into a war of self-defense. 13 years ago to the day before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, announcing the commencement of open hostilities in the Pacific, a group of distinguished American statesmen were assembled in the Capitol building at Washington, D.C. Their purpose was to discuss the advisability of the United States ratification of the now famous Kellogg-Briand Peace Pact. In the group was none other than the co-author of that document himself, then Secretary of State, the Honorable Frank B. Kellogg. In the course of the recorded discussions that took place, Secretary Kellogg was asked this question: suppose a country is not attacked. Suppose there is an economic blockade. Secretary Kellogg replied, "There is no such thing as a blockade without you are in war." A senator then said, "It is an act of war." And Secretary Kellogg concurred, saying, "An act of war, absolutely." During the same conference, Secretary Kellogg also stated to the body of senators, "As I have explained before, nobody on earth probably could write an article defining self-defense or aggressor that some country could not get around. And I made up my mind that the only safe thing for any country to do was to judge for itself, within its sovereign rights, whether it was unjustly attacked and had a right to defend itself, and it must answer to the opinion of the world. The foregoing is not set forth for the purpose of criticizing American statesmen or governmental leaders, but only to show that it is a solid thought existing in the United States, at least, that to interfere with a country's economic stability is a dire and drastic movement. To indicate to this tribunal that none other than the co-author of the Pact of Paris regarded such economic interference as an act of war absolutely, we have quoted from the language used by Secretary Kellogg to reveal with conciseness and clarity that this great and learned American admitted with extreme frankness that it was the inherent right of a country to judge whether it had a right to defend itself or not, based upon the factual situation confronting it. Military action against Japan. Hand in hand with the express policy of economic strangulation of Japan, the Western powers took more forceful and drastic action to enforce their policy with military might. Can the prosecution rightfully contend that by furnishing men and materials of war to China and the consequent spilling of Japanese blood on Chinese soil, there was no aggression against Japan? Let us examine the evidence and see if Japan had just cause to react against the military ring being forged around her. The facts amply demonstrate she had just provocation to strike in self-defense. As early as 1933, the United States allocated funds for the purpose of constructing and equipping 32 naval vessels. Next year, the Vincent Naval Bill was authorized for construction of ships up to the limits of the Washington and London naval treaties. In April 1935, the United States War Department Appropriation Act authorized an increase in the Army to 165,000 enlisted men. While Japan was endeavoring to work out its economic difficulties through legislation, Admiral R.E. Ingersoll went to London in December 1937. The primary purpose of his visit was to investigate and talk with the British Admiralty on figures regarding command relationships, communications, liaison, codes, ciphers, and so forth. These conversations were based on the assumption that the United States and Great Britain might find themselves at war with Japan in the Pacific. He readily admitted before the Pearl Harbor Investigation Committee that his purpose in going there was to, quote, work out a tentative plan as to how each nation would cooperate with the other in the event that war should occur, end quote. The report of these conferences remained effective until later agreements ABC-1 became effective in 1940 and 1941. Admiral Stark, in his testimony before the same committee, corroborated this visit. On January 28, 1938, it was recommended to the Congress of the United States that the United States national defense should be strengthened, not limited to one ocean and one coast. It is probable that her collapse will occur as a result of economic blockade, naval pressure, and air bombardment, end quote. It also referred to the offensive value of Luzon for submarine and Air Force operations and recommended that every effort should be made to maintain a bombing force there, as well as building up a similar force in China, and also pointed out under the heading of, quote, Plan for Employment of Land and Air Forces, that the operating of Chinese guerrilla forces, armed, equipped, and directed by the associated powers. Steps have already been taken by the British government to organize such operations. It is recommended that the United States government organize similar guerrilla forces. The report further states the organization of subversive activities in Japan occupied territories. Activities of this kind are already being organized by the British government. It is recommended that the United States should also undertake such activities and coordinate them closely with the British. On May 27, 1941, President Roosevelt proclaimed the existence of an unlimited national emergency. And he also stated that the program of the United States had given it time to build more guns and tanks and planes and ships. At that time, he also made the significant pronouncement that, quote, we in the Americas will decide for ourselves whether and when and where our American interests were attacked or our security threatened, end quote. This was not an idle statement. It is submitted that if the United States contended it had the right to determine for itself when its security was threatened, the same rule should apply with respect to Japan. A memorandum was sent from Martin Curry to President Roosevelt May 9, 1941, regarding an aircraft program for China, in which he informed the President that he had worked out a tentative program for the balance of the year and pointed out the importance of establishing a Chinese Air Force in China and the psychological importance of such a program for the Chinese. Attached to the memorandum was a tentative program which includes the supplying of 244 pursuit ships, 122 bombers, 340 trainers, and 22 transport planes. The schedule provided for increased amounts from May to December 1941 and for a first 6 months in 1942. The President answered this note on the date of May 15, 1941. Stating it was all right to go ahead and negotiate, but he did not want to imply that he was at that time in favor of the proposal. He suggested that it could only be worked out in relationship to the whole military program and should be taken up with General Burns and General Arnold.